Welcome back, guys. In the last video, we saw the flow of how things work with HTTP-only cookies, and then we also ended up putting together our backend API and wrap that up. And now in this video, I want to start to piece together our front end a little bit more by doing things like completing our simple homepage, adding at least a start for a navbar. And then the main goal I want is to have a register page where we can actually register an account. So that's going to be the goal in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. I can open up my front end, source, pages, and the first thing I want to work on is just this index.js, which is our homepage, and I just want to put this together. So what I want on my homepage is some sort of jumbotron. So what I want to do right now, before I start writing any code, is I just want to run my front end and my back end. So I'm going to navigate into my backend folder, activate my virtual environment. Then I want to make sure my database is running. So I'm going to start that up, and then I'm going to run my server. Then I'm going to open up another terminal. I'm going to navigate into my front end, do an npm run dev, and that's going to run my front end. And then I have a browser open here, where then I can have my Next.js front end running in here. So this is the current application right now. So let's fix up this homepage first off. So I'm going to add some styling to this div to make it look like a jumbotron, but with Bootstrap 5, we no longer have a jumbotron class. So instead, what I'm going to do is have some utility classes that make it look like a jumbotron. So I'm going to have some padding. So I'm going to do p-5, which is going to put padding all around. I'm going to have a background light, which is going to be a light gray color. And then I'm going to do rounded 3 just to have rounded edges. Then I'm going to have another div where I'm going to have this h1 residing inside of there. And then I'm going to add some styling to this. I'm going to have class name, container, fluid, and py-3. So this container fluid is just going to have a container that's the full width, and then this py-3 is just padding on the top and bottom, just to have a little bit of additional padding. And then for this h1, I'm going to add a class name of display-5 just to make the text larger. And then I'm going to have font weight bold. And then below this h1, I'm going to have a paragraph with a class name with a font size of 4, and then some margin at the top. And then this paragraph is just going to say, welcome to the HTTP, I'm going to do it like this, httpOnly auth tutorial site. So this is what my homepage is going to be. Let's check it out. So I'm going to refresh. And there we are. Now we have this. Now another thing I want is to have a container wrapping all this, and also want the navbar here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a higher order component called layout. And then I'm going to use this layout in all of my pages. So in my source, I'm going to make a new folder called HOCS, which is going to be for higher order components. I'm going to make a component in there called layout.js. And then I'm going to create my layout component here. So I'm going to go ahead and define my layout. It's going to return some JSX. So I'm going to have a div. And actually, instead of a div, I can just have an empty fragment like so. I'm going to export this layout. Then in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a head tag. So that's something I have to import. I'm going to import head from next head. And this is something that's going to let me do things like have title tags and meta tags. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a title tag here. And then I'm just going to bring in this title as a prop. So inside of here, I'm going to destructure props, and I'm going to bring in title. So I can pass that to here. And then I'm also going to have a meta tag where I'm going to have name of description, and then content will be content. And then that's another thing I'm going to pass in here. So then I can pass it as a prop and put it inside of this content. So that's going to be my head. After that, I'm going to have a navbar. So this is something I have to create. So in my components, I'm going to create this navbar. So I'm going to do const navbar. And then for now, I'm just going to have a nav that says navbar, and then do a default export. And then back in my layout, I can import that navbar. So there we are. And then here, I'm going to have a div with a class name of container. And then in here, I'm going to bring in children. And then that's another thing I have to destructure here for my props. And then children is going to be whatever's between the layout tags. So just to demonstrate that, in here, I can import my layout. And then I can wrap all of this in my layout. So the children is all of this stuff here. And then that's going to have that class name of container that wraps all of it. So we're going to have some padding on the left and the right. And then finally, I also have to pass some props here. So I'm going to do a title. And then for my title, I'm going to do http only auth and then home. And then I'm also going to have that content, which I'm going to do homepage for this auth tutorial on HTTP only cookies with JSON Web Tokens. So a nice description there. And then I'm going to go back to my layout. One thing I want to also do is just have some defaults for this title and content. So the way that I can do that is right over here. I can do layout.default props. And then I can create some defaults for my title and then for my content. So for my title, I'll do something like HTTP only auth. And then for my content, I'll do tutorial for showing you how to use HTTP only cookies for storing JSON Web Tokens. So this is what I'm going to have for my defaults. So now I'm all wrapped up with this layout, and I'm also wrapped up with my homepage. So if I go back now, I see now that I have that container, and then I also have my navbar. So now let's work on this navbar. So I have Bootstrap right here. So I just search for Bootstrap, and then I'm going to open up the documentation, go to the docs, and then I want to search for a navbar. So let's find a nice navbar. So I'm going to go down until I find one that I like. And I'm going to grab this one here because it's easy to tweak. So I'm just going to grab this code. I'm going to go to my navbar. And then I'm just going to paste this code right between here. And now we're going to have to make quite a few adjustments to this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this class. And I'm going to do a Command D just to grab all of these. I'm going to click the right key and then add name. So I have class name here instead. And then I also like to use single quotes. So I'm just going to select all of these double quotes and change them to be single quotes. So there we are. And then I'm also going to delete these list items here because I'm only going to keep this one for the home. All the rest of these I'm going to get rid of. Also fix up this indenting. And then I'm also going to bring in link. So I'm going to import link from next link. This time I'm going to have my navigation. And then here I'm going to use link, which is going to have an href, which goes to slash. And then if I want to have styling, like right here, what I need to do is have an anchor tag. And then with this anchor tag, now I can have my class name, which I'm just going to copy this and cut it, and then put it right into here. So now this is how I can have the styling actually applied. Because if you have this class name on the link, it's not going to apply the styling. And I don't have to have this a tag here, but if you want styling, then you do need it. So now I'm going to go ahead and fix up this one right here. So this is for my home page. So I don't need this right here. And then let's say if I'm on the home page, I want to have the active class be present inside of here. And then same thing for other pages, like let's say with our login page or dashboard, register page. For all those, I want to have this active class present when we're on those pages. So a way that I can have that logic is by importing use router, which is going to come from next router. And then I can have a return here where I wrap all this in curly braces. Then I'm going to fix up this indenting. And then right in here, I'm going to do const router is use router. And now what I can do is I can grab the path name from this router, and then I can see if it's, say, equal to slash, or if it's equal to slash register, and so forth. So now what I'm going to do is this, I'm going to change to a link first off. And then I'm going to have the anchor tag, where I have this class name. Then I'm going to have home. And then this right here is going to be an href that goes to slash. And then right now I want to have some logic in here. So I'm going to have curly braces in here. And then I'm going to check if router.pathname, pathname is equal to slash. If that's the case, I'm going to have this styling. Otherwise, I'm going to have just this styling here without the active class. So that's how I can implement this logic. And then I can also have this on separate lines just so it's a little bit cleaner. So there we are. So now we should have a nice looking navbar. And then also I want to just put this stuff on separate lines as well, just so it's a little cleaner as well. So this right here is going to be our hamburger button when we're on a smaller screen. All right, so let's check out how things look right now. And there we go. Now we have our navbar with our home link right here. So the next thing I want to do is have our register page. So inside of my pages, I'm going to make a new component, which is going to be register.js. And you have to spell it like this. So that way when we go to /register, then we're going to go ahead and load up this component. That's how you work with Next.js. So I'm going to go ahead and do const register page. And then this is going to have some logic since we will have a form. Then I'm going to do export default register page. I'm going to return some JSX. For now, I'm just going to have an empty div. And then also I'm going to just have capital here. So one thing I need to bring in is my use state, since I will have form data that I'm going to manage with this state, and that's going to come from React. So right at the top here, I'm going to have const form data, set form data, which is use state. And then in the last video, we saw the data that we're going to be working with. So we're going to be working with the first name, which by default is just going to be empty like so. We're going to have the last name, the username, password, and repassword. All right, then I'm going to destructure all of these. And I'm going to destructure them from the form data. And just to make it easier, I'm going to copy them, paste them in here. And then I want to remove this part here. So I'm going to do a command D a couple times, delete, and there we go. And just like that, now I have them all destructured. Then I want to have an onChange. So I'm going to do const onChange. This is going to be whenever I change the values inside of my different form inputs. So I'm going to have set form data, spread operator on form data, e.target.name, which is going to be e.target.value. So when we're inputting stuff inside of one of the input fields in the form, e.target.name is going to target one of these values. And then we're going to have the spread operator on the form data. That way we don't touch anything else, but we're only adjusting the one value to be e.target.value, which is whatever we're inputting in that input field. And then because we're going to have a form, I'm also going to have an onSubmit. Just going to take an event. And this is where I'm going to do my register. So first I'm going to do an e.prevent default, just so we prevent the default behavior of refreshing the page. Then we're going to come back to this onSubmit once we implement our register logic inside of our action creator, which is going to actually make that request. And then because this register is a page, another thing I want to bring in is my layout. So I'm going to import layout from my higher order components layout. And then I'm going to have that here instead of this div, where then I can pass the title and the content to this. So as for the title, I'm going to do httpOnly auth register. And then for the content, I'll do register page for this auth tutorial on HTTP only cookies. So then between here, I'm going to have my h1. Just going to have a class name of display-4. And it's going to say register page. And then below this, I'm going to have my form. And that's going to have a class name of background light. It's going to have some padding, margin at the top, and margin at the bottom. This is going to make it look a little bit nicer. And I'm also going to have the onSubmit, where I can pass in my onSubmit and then the event is going to be passed on automatically, because right now we're accepting this event, but I don't have to explicitly pass it like so. I can just have it like this, and it'll work as well. So now below here, I'm going to have an h3, which is going to say create an account. Then I'm going to have a div with a class name of form group. And then here I'm going to have my label, which is going to have a class name of form label. And also I'm going to have some margin at the top. And then I'm going to have a strong tag where then I put in first name with a star. And then here I also want to pass an HTML4, which is going to be first name. Then below this label, I'm going to have my input. So that's going to have a class name of form control. It's going to be a type of text. I'm going to have the name of first name. It's going to have a placeholder, which is going to be first name. I'm going to have the onChange, and then I'm going to have the value, and then this is going to be first name, and then I also want this to be required, so I'm also going to put on this required. There we go. We have our first input field. Let's take a look at how that looks. So if I go to /register, so there we go. We have our register page. Now this is hugging the top pretty closely, so maybe I want to adjust that a little bit. So I'm going to do margin top 5. That should look a little bit better. Yeah, that looks good. So now I'm going to go ahead and start implementing the rest of these input fields. So I'm going to copy this whole form group, paste below here. So this next one's going to be for the last name. And then this is all going to be last name. It's going to be a type of text. The placeholder is going to be last name. And there we go. Let's see how the margin top 5 looks. That's quite a bit of spacing. Maybe I'll do a little less. So I'll do margin top 3. See how that looks. And there we go. That's better. And then the next thing I want to do is the username. So this is going to say username. Placeholder is also going to be username. It's going to be a type of text. All of these are going to be username. And that should be good. So now the next ones are going to be the password and then the repassword. So this one here is going to be for my password. I'm going to grab these usernames, change it to be password. So the HTML4, the name, and the value are all going to be password. It's going to be a type of password instead of type of text. And then I also want to pass this min length prop and set it to be 8. Because remember, we want to have at least 8 characters. So I want to make sure that this is also handled on the front end here instead of just handled on the back end. So that way, if someone doesn't input a password that's long enough, we don't even make the API request. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead, copy this, paste below, and this is going to be for our repassword. So here I'm going to have repassword. And then in the name, I'm going to have repassword. And then in the value, I'm going to have repassword as well. And then I'm going to have this say confirm password. And then same thing here, confirm password. All right, so now we have all of our different input fields. So it's looking quite good. Next, we need to have our button. So below here, I'm going to have my button. It's going to have a class name of button, button primary to make it blue. It's going to have margin at the top. It's going to be a type of submit, which you don't have to pass, but I like to pass it. And then it's going to have the text create account. All right, so let's check that out. All right, so it's looking quite good. Now I also want to have a register button in my navbar, so let's also do that. So I'm going to open up my navbar, and then I'm going to copy this, paste it below here, and then I'm going to have this say register, and here it's going to be register, and then this is going to have the text of register. So that way we have that button. Later I'm going to have some more logic because when we're authenticated, I want to show a logout button, and when we're not authenticated, I want to show the register and the login buttons on this navbar. So I'm going to change things up a little bit later, but for now I'm going to have it like so. So now we can see this register button, and then we also see the appropriate active class when we're on the page itself. So now let's start implementing our logic to actually register for an account. Because on my onSubmit, what I want to do is actually pass in an action creator for registering an account, which is going to go ahead and make a request to our Next.js API, which is going to make a request further to our Django backend. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have this logic on my Next.js API. So this API folder is where you can do this. So right now I have this hello.js. I'm just going to rename this. Actually, I'm going to delete it. Or not rename, delete. There we go. I'm going to create a folder in here. So I'm going to do account. And then in there, I'm going to make a register.js. So the way this is going to work is in our Next.js client, when we make an API request to API/account/register, it's going to hit what's inside of here. So that's the way it works. And then let's say if I didn't have this account folder, I just had this register inside of this API folder. Then if I hit API/register, then it would hit what's in here. So it works kind of similarly to how you have it with these pages, where what you name them is what's going to be the actual endpoint. So inside of here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sending a request to localhost 8000. Now, technically, when you actually end up going into production, instead of hitting localhost 8000, you'd hit your actual domain. So a good thing to do is instead of writing localhost 8000 and then later once your app you want to push to production, you don't want to go back and change it everywhere. So what you can do is have an environment variable. So inside of my front end folder, I'm going to have a .env. Then inside of here, I'm going to have next_public_API URL. And then these have to start with next public underscore. You can't just name an API URL. And then this is going to be my HTTP localhost 8000. So I'm going to save that. And then just so I don't have to refer to this name as next public API URL, because the way I'd actually end up accessing this is by doing process.env.next public API URL. So instead of doing that, I just want to do something like API URL, just refer to it as this. So a way that I can do that is I can, in my source, oh, not in here. There we go. So in here, I can make a config folder. And then in this config folder, I can make an index.js. And then I can do export const API URL, which is going to be process.env.next public API URL. So now I just have to make sure I import this inside of my register API route. So I can do that with import API URL from config index. And now I can refer to this like so. Then here I'm going to do export default async request response. This is how I define my API endpoint. Then first I'm going to do an if check, where I check if request.method is post, because I want this to be a post request that's sent to this Next.js API from my client. And then if that's not the case, I'm going to do response.setHeader, allow, post, and then I'm going to return a response.status, which is going to be a 405, and I'm going to have some JSON, where I'm going to have an error, and it's going to say method request.method not allowed. So that's going to be in the case where a post request isn't sent to API/account/register. So that's what I expect. Now, if it is a post request, then we're going to proceed. So I'm going to have const. So I'm going to destructure from the request.body all those different values: the first name, last name, username, password, and repassword. So I'm going to grab, I'm actually going to do this on separate lines. So I'm going to do first name, last name, username, password, and repassword. This is all going to come from request.body. And then I'm going to have a try catch, where then in here I can do const API response is await. And I'm going to use the fetch API in this case. And now I can bring in my API URL. And then the endpoint I'm hitting to register, remember, is API/account/register. So if you don't remember why, well, right here in our root URLs, we have API/account/, and then in our account URLs, we have register. That's going to access our register view. So then back in here, I'm gonna have a comma, set of curly braces, where then I can set the method where it's gonna be post, because remember we set this as a post request. I'm gonna have some headers. I'm gonna have an accept header. It's gonna be application, JSON, and then the only JSON data that we're getting back is either a success or error. And then I'm also gonna have a content type, which is also gonna be application JSON. And then finally, I'm just gonna pass the body, which is something I have to actually create here. So I'm gonna do const body. It's gonna be JSON.stringify. And then I'm gonna stringify all these values that we extracted. So that way I'm passing this along to my API endpoint to register as JSON data. And then I'm gonna go get the data back from this response. So I'm gonna do const data is await API response.json. That's how I can get that data. And then I want to check if we got a 201 status code, because remember, that's what determines whether this was successful. So back in my register view, we can see that right over here. If we successfully created our account, we have the success data that we sent back along with a 201 status. So I'm going to check for if API response.status is 201. If that's the case, I'm going to return response.status of 201. And also I called this API response just to not have conflicts with this response here. So just to clarify that. So this is what I'm going to end up sending back. So just to clarify, if you remember from our document that we were looking at with the flow in the last video, this right here is the response from our Django API endpoint, so our real endpoint. And then this right here is our API that Next.js on the client is communicating with. So now we see this right here. So we're going to match this response and send it to our Next.js client. So since we've got a 201 status code, we're going to send back this 201 status code. And then I'm also going to send some JSON along with this, which is going to be success. And then that success is going to be data.success. Because this data is going to be whatever data was passed back. And once again, actually I already showed it like a second ago, but we have that success object inside of there that we want to extract from this data. And that's going to be that success message that our account was created successfully. And then if we didn't get a 201 created, then what I'm going to do instead is return a response.status, which is going to be API response.status. So whatever the status code was on our Django backend server is what I'm going to pass back here as well, just to mirror it. And then I'm going to pass back some JSON where I'm going to have error, which is going to be data.error. So we're going to extract whatever error ended up occurring. Because in our responses, whenever we have an error, I send back some kind of error. So we're going to grab whatever that is. And then finally, in this catch, if we hit this catch, something went wrong in this code for whatever reason. Maybe it's because our backend API is not running. And then in that case, we're not going to have access to this data. So instead, we're going to do something more custom. We're going to return a response.status of 500 and pass back some JSON. And then here I'm going to have an error, which is going to say something went wrong when registering for an account. And then I can also do it without the quotes here. So I'll actually do it like this. And there we go. Now we have our API endpoint, which is going to be our Next.js API, which is going to go ahead and make this register request, which is going to get sent off to our Django backend API. We're going to get a response, and we're going to mirror that response back to our Next.js client. So now let's go ahead and work on our action creator for registering an account, because that's what's going to go ahead and hit this endpoint here. We could also hit this directly from our register page, but I also wanted to show how you can implement Redux inside of your application, so that we can also have global state. So I'm going to close this up, and then also close up that Navbar. And I'm going to have this open for now because I'm going to utilize that action creator after we make it. So I'm going to go in this actions folder. I'm going to open up this auth and this types. First, I'm going to work in these types. So I want to have two dispatch types. So export const register success. I'm going to pass this between these quotes. I'm going to copy down a line, and I'm going to have a register fail. So these are going to be my two dispatch types. Then back in my auth, what I'm going to do first is bring in those two dispatch types. And then these are coming from my types. So I had my register success, register fail. And now let's define our register action creator. So I'm going to do export const register. I'm going to have a couple of parameters, so I'm going to do it on separate lines. I'm going to have my first name I accept, the last name, the username, password, and repassword. I'm going to have an async dispatch. And then inside of here, what I'm going to do is have a try catch. And then in this try part, I'm going to have const response is await fetch. And then I'm going to have /API/account/register. So I can just hit this directly like this. So that's going to hit my API account register, which then is further going to go ahead and make a request to my Django backend API. Now this here is technically an endpoint where we don't deal with the HTTP only cookie and where we don't have to be authorized. So you could technically also have just made this request directly to the Django backend API. But in this case, I'm just going to send this request off to my Next.js API, which is going to send off the request to my Django backend server. But you could also have sent off this request directly to the Django backend API. It's really up to you. This is just how I chose to do it in this case. Then here, I'm going to have the method of post, because that's what we expect. If I go into my API register, we want this to be a post request sent over here. I'm going to have my headers, where I'm going to have my accept header. It's going to be application JSON. And I'm also going to have my content type. And then I'm also going to have a body, which I have to define. So I'm going to do that right over here. Const body. It's going to be JSON.stringify. And then I want to stringify all these values so that they're passed as JSON data along in this request to my Next.js API. Then we're going to extract them, put them back into JSON data, and send them to our Django backend server. And then the next thing I want to do is check if response.status is 201. If that's the case, then I'm going to dispatch my success case. I'm going to dispatch a type of register success. And then in the case where this isn't the case, I'm going to dispatch the fail case. So I'm going to dispatch register fail instead. And then I'm going to do the same thing inside of my catch. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. So this 201 is going to come from here, the Next.js API. That's going to come from this return, the response.status of 201. So that's where that is coming from. And then another thing that I can do, because inside of my reducer auth, I have this loading piece of Redux state. I also want to dispatch something that's going to set this to true and then back to false. So back inside of my types, I'm going to have two more types. I'm going to do export const set auth loading. I'm going to put this in here, copy down a line, and then I'm going to have remove auth loading. So I'm going to have these two dispatch cases as well. And then back inside of my auth.js, inside of my actions folder, I'm going to bring these two in. So set auth loading, remove auth loading. And then before this try part happens, I'm going to dispatch a type of set auth loading. And then once this whole thing completes, then I'm going to dispatch the remove auth loading. So this is going to be our complete register action creator. So now let's go into our reducer inside of here and handle these different dispatch cases. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually import these different dispatch types that we created. And this is going to come from my actions/types. And then to make this easier, I'm just going to open up this auth.js, grab these, copy them, and paste them between here. So I don't have to type them all out. And now let's handle these different cases. So for the case of a register success, what I'm going to do is return spread operator on state. So that way the only thing I'm changing inside of my state here is this register success, which I'm going to set to true. So when this is true, I'm going to redirect to the login page. That's the goal. And then I'm going to have the case for register fail, which is going to return spread operator on state. And that's all it's really going to do. I'm just not going to adjust any of the state. I'm just going to keep it as is. Then I'm going to have my case for set auth loading. Just going to return spread operator on state. And then I'm going to set my loading piece of Redux state to be true. Then I'm going to copy this and paste here. This is going to be my remove auth loading. And all it's going to do is set this loading piece of Redux state to be false instead. So here's our reducer now, all implemented. So now I can go back in my register page. And then to work with Redux inside of here, what I can do is I can import use selector and use dispatch, which are coming from React Redux. And then I can bring in my action creator. So I'm going to import register, which is coming from actions auth. And then I also want to have a component, which is going to be a loader. So I'm going to stop running my Next.js front end. I'm going to do an npm install save react loader spinner. It's going to give me a component that is just going to be a spinner that signifies that things are loading. I'm going to rerun my front end now. And then I'm going to bring in this component. So import loader from react loader spinner. And then I'm going to know that I'm going to show this thing when my loading piece of Redux state is true. So at the top here, I'm going to do const loading. So now this is how you can bring in a piece of Redux state. You use the use selector. When you want to dispatch an action creator, you use the use dispatch. So right here, I can do loading is use selector. And then I can do state with an arrow function and then state.auth dot, and then the piece of Redux state, which is loading. So state.auth is going to grab my auth reducer because inside of my combine reducers, that's what I refer to this as. I refer to it as auth. Then inside of here, I have this loading piece of Redux state. So that's how we're accessing it right here. And then I also want my register success, which I'm going to later implement just because we don't have our login page quite yet. But I'm going to have it in here just to have it. I'm going to have use selector or state arrow function state.auth.register success. And then that's what I refer to it as here. Then what I also want to do is const dispatch is use dispatch. And then now I can use this to dispatch my action creators. So what I can do now is go to my on submit. Then I can check if dispatch and dispatch doesn't equal null and dispatch doesn't equal undefined. If that's the case, we're going to utilize our action creator. So I'm going to dispatch my register action creator, passing in the first name, last name, username, password, and repassword. And there we are. We now finally have our logic in place to register an account. So now let's go ahead and test out registering an account. So here we are. Now we have our form. So now I'm going to do John Doe. Now I think I already used the username of John Doe, so I'll do John Doe 1. Set my password. And let's see if we can create this account. So right now we're not getting redirected or anything, so we don't really know if this was successful yet until we implement that logic. So what I can do instead is open up my Python backend terminal, and there we go. We got a 201 created status code. So that means that this was all successful. And then to further confirm that this was successful, we can even try to hit our endpoint to get an access and refresh token. So I can do something like open up Postman. So now inside of Postman, what I can do is I can actually test out some of these endpoints. So right here, I can retrieve my access refresh token. Now in this case, I'm using John Doe 1, which is what I just created on my Next.js client. So I can send this off. There we go. I get an access and refresh token. I can grab this access token now. And if I want to get my user, I hit this endpoint here, API account user. And then I go into my headers. And then I can put in this access token instead. Send this off. There we go. We get John Doe 1. So that confirms now that our register ended up working on our Next.js client. So we successfully used Redux here. We dispatched this register action creator, passing in our first name, last name, username, password, repassword, which were all values. We ended up using a form in order to adjust these values. Then that hit our register action creator. So we accepted all of these parameters, the first name, last name, username, password, and repassword. We did a JSON stringify on these, and then we ended up making a request to our Next.js API, and we hit the endpoint API account register, passing in this data as a post request. So then that ended up hitting this API account register. We hit this post request. Let me also close up this terminal. So we accepted these values. We then turned them into JSON data again. Then we hit our real Django backend API, which is localhost 8000/API account register as a post request. And then we passed in that data. We got a response back from our Django backend API. We checked if the status was 201. In this case where it was successful, it was. So then we returned a status of 201 to our Next.js client with the success message, which we don't actually utilize, but if you had things like alerts, you could utilize this. So then back inside of the register action creator, we then got the response back from our Next.js API. We dispatched our register success, which then we went into our reducer. We hit this register success, which then just set this register success to true. So we had no way to really signify on our client yet that everything was successful with the registration, but we're going to get to that. So there we go. We ended up finally hitting the goal of this video, which was to have the logic for registering an account. So that's going to be everything for this video. And then in the next video, we can start dealing with how we can log in. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't yet, please hit that like button. It goes a long way to help a channel like mine grow and get recognized so others could benefit from the videos I release as well. Also, I have links in the description that you can check out. I have one for an e-commerce course that you can check out if you're interested in learning to develop an application like that. I also have a link for joining my Web Development Kings Facebook group. That way, if you want to personally ask me something, then you can go ahead and do that, and I will happily help you out. It doesn't cost you anything. So if you're scratching your head about something, then go ahead and feel free to ask me to help you out. Only questions I probably won't answer are if you want me to help you build a personal project, as I don't quite have the time for that. You can also post something in the group itself. That way other developers in the group can also help you out. And then the group is all about growing your expertise as a developer. So if you're interested in that, then go ahead and click the link in the description and join the family. Also, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on those notification bells. That way you don't miss out when I release a new video, and I'll see you in the next one.